I'm Evelyn Ward, 34, a soldier, a daughter, and the sister my family would rather erase. Tonight, I'm done being their shadow. At every table, Michael shines. My mother beams, donors cheer, generals lean in. Me? I'm placed at the edge, behind a floral centerpiece, like I'm part of the decor instead of the bloodline. But the night he lifted his glass at the gala, turning my war record into a joke, something inside me cracked. Not weakness. Fire. Ever been humiliated by the very people who should have had your back? Hit like if you've ever been dismissed by your own family. Comment if someone else's spotlight burned you invisible. It all began beneath chandeliers too bright to forgive, when my brother raised his toast and I became the punchline. The glare from the chandeliers above was blinding, fractured into shards of light across the polished marble floor of the ballroom. Evelyn steadied herself against the edge of the linen-draped table, forcing a smile that she knew didn't reach her eyes. Hours earlier, Michael's voice had cut through her memory like a cold reprimand. Don't embarrass the family tonight. He had said it with the same air of command he once reserved for briefing rooms, except now it was a warning, meant to shrink her into the background of her own life. The charity gala was already in full swing, the hum of violins weaving around the chatter of Washington's elite. Generals in dress uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder with corporate titans in tuxedos. Crystal glasses clinked, waiters moved like clockwork, and the scent of expensive perfume hung heavy. Evelyn's gown felt like armor she hadn't chosen, sequins pressed too tightly across her shoulders, as if her very presence here was a disguise. She sat at the family's designated table, though family was only a word in name. She had been placed at the edge, half hidden by a floral centerpiece, as though her mother and siblings hoped she might blend into the decor. Michael was in his element, polished, commanding, the perfect host. Guests leaned toward him, captivated, while Evelyn remained invisible in his shadow. Every smile directed her way seemed tinged with pity or amusement. She tried to steady her breathing, but the air felt dense, suffocating beneath the gilded ceiling. Then, without warning, Michael raised his glass. The room hushed, eager for his words. His voice, rich and assured, carried easily across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'd like to acknowledge my sister who graces us tonight." Dozens of heads turned toward her. Evelyn's throat tightened. "Her record overseas," he continued, "is colorful. Reckless glory, some might say." A ripple of laughter rolled through the tables. Polite, controlled, but sharp enough to slice into her chest. Evelyn froze, her nails biting into her palm beneath the tablecloth. She wanted to stand, to correct him, to remind them all of the names engraved on the memorial walls, men and women who had trusted her leadership. But her voice stuck, caught between fury and humiliation. Her mother's eyes, once her refuge, were fixed firmly on the rim of her glass. Not a word, not even the smallest gesture of defense. Olivia, elegant and silent beside Margaret, kept her gaze on the donors opposite, as if pretending Evelyn didn't exist would erase the scene. Michael wasn't finished. He lifted his glass higher, reveling in the attention. "My sister's career," he declared, "is proof that medals don't equal wisdom." The line struck like artillery fire, and the laughter this time was louder, crueler. Evelyn's heart hammered in her ears. Every medal, every scar, every sleepless night reduced to a punchline. Heat flooded her face, shame mingling with rage until it was almost unbearable. She rose quickly, the chair legs scraping against the marble in a sound that seemed to echo louder than the orchestra. Heads turned again, some amused, some curious, but none compassionate. She escaped toward the terrace doors, her heels clicking too sharply across the floor. Cool night air rushed against her flushed skin as she pushed into the darkness outside. Hands trembling, she pressed them against the stone railing, willing herself not to collapse. The city lights glittered in the distance, mocking her with their steadiness. Behind her, the muffled laughter continued, glass after glass raised in hollow celebration. But it was the whispers she caught soft, seeping through the open doorway that seared themselves deepest. Why is she even here? Scandal spreads faster than truth, especially when family fuels the fire. 3 days after the gala, Evelyn sat slumped on the edge of her couch, the bluish glow of the television casting uneven shadows across her apartment walls. The anchors' voices carried a smooth detachment, but every clipped phrase dug under her skin. They spoke of her commendations with faint amusement, then pivoted to the gala toast, as if it were the defining measure of her career. A ticker scrolled across the bottom of the screen, Colonel's war record under scrutiny. Evelyn remembered a very different set of headlines. Years ago in Iraq, words like heroic and unflinching. Now those same networks replayed Michael's smirk, reducing her service into sound bites and innuendo. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, a torrent of messages and mentions from people she didn't know. Some defended her, most mocked. She tried not to look, but her own face appeared again and again, frozen mid-reaction at the gala, eyes wide, lips pressed into silence. The shot had gone viral, the caption morphing from one cruel phrase to another. The knock on the door was almost a relief. She opened it to find Daniel, leaning on a crutch, his shoulders still broad despite the injuries that had nearly ended his career. His father, General Beckett, had always spoken of Evelyn with respect, and Daniel carried that same loyalty. He stepped inside without waiting, setting down his bag of rehab equipment. "Rough week," he said simply, scanning the darkened room. Evelyn tried to laugh, but the sound came out brittle. He didn't press her for words. Instead, he unrolled a resistance band, anchored it against the leg of the couch, and guided her through the motions that kept her own old injuries from stiffening. Their silence was companionable, a buffer against the storm outside the walls. Later, when the session ended, she noticed he'd left a thermos of coffee on the counter. A quiet gesture, unspoken encouragement. Her apartment vibrated with another intrusion, this time a call from Alexis. The young officer's voice crackled with indignation. "Ma'am, they're talking in the mess hall, junior staff repeating Michael's lines like gospel. I told them medals aren't handed out for clumsiness. I told them you earned every one." Alexis's loyalty pierced the fog of shame, and Evelyn felt a small swell of gratitude. Still, the sting of betrayal by her own blood drowned most of the comfort. Evening bled into night. The television droned on until Evelyn muted it, unable to bear the endless commentary. That was when she noticed the envelope shoved beneath her door. No return address. Her pulse quickened as she tore it open. Inside was a grainy photograph from the gala, her figure blurred under the harsh lighting, Michael beside her mid-toast. A newspaper headline had been circled in red ink. "Colonel Liability?" Her breath caught. Someone wanted her to see this not as news but as a threat, a reminder. The edges of the photo curled under her grip, her nails biting into the paper. Then her phone lit up again. A single text message blinked across the screen, chilling in its brevity. "You'll regret challenging him. Silence is a verdict. And in my family, silence always favors Michael." The Ward townhouse stood in its usual polished perfection that Sunday morning, sunlight pouring through tall windows onto china plates and polished silver. The smell of coffee and buttered croissants filled the air, though Evelyn's stomach churned too hard to taste any of it. The family brunch was a ritual, a performance more than a gathering, where appearances mattered more than affection. Michael arrived last, naturally, yet commanded the room the instant he walked in. His voice filled the dining space with easy authority, weaving stories of defense contracts and lobbyist dinners, painting himself as indispensable to the military-industrial machinery of Washington. Donors adored him, generals deferred to him, and even Margaret, perched at the head of the table, beamed as if his victories were hers. Evelyn sat opposite, her fork motionless, feeling like a guest in her own family's home. Margaret broke the rhythm only to direct her gaze at Evelyn, her tone as sharp as the edge of her knife. "The family has weathered enough embarrassment," she said, lifting her teacup with steady hands. "Dragging us down with these dramatics is beneath you. Your brother is building a legacy. Don't make yourself the shadow that taints it." The words pierced deeper than the news headlines had. Evelyn searched Olivia's face, hoping for some protest, some defense. But her sister's eyes only flicked toward her with something unreadable sympathy, perhaps, or fear. Either way, Olivia said nothing. The silence was deafening. Conversation resumed, Michael turning effortlessly back to contracts and budgets as though Evelyn had already been dismissed from relevance. Evelyn's pulse throbbed in her temples, the humiliation pressing heavy in her chest. Every sentence he spoke reinforced the hierarchy Margaret had blessed. Michael the heir, Evelyn the mistake. When the plates cleared, Michael found his moment. He leaned close, as Evelyn rose from the table, his breath warm against her ear. "Keep your head down," he whispered, low enough that only she could hear, "or I'll bury you." The words were not theatrical. They were a promise, weighted with the kind of power he knew he wielded. Evelyn stiffened, her fists tightening at her sides. She forced herself back to her chair, cheeks burning, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Across the table, Olivia reached for her glass, her fingers brushing Evelyn's under the linen. The movement seemed casual, but then Evelyn felt the slip of paper pressed into her palm. She closed her hand quickly, hiding the note beneath the table as her heart pounded. Whatever Olivia's silence had meant, this small act hinted at something else. A secret alignment, a crack in the facade. He didn't just aim at my career, he aimed at my memory. The Pentagon's corridors stretched in endless marble symmetry, each echo of Evelyn's boots reminding her of the weight she carried. She had walked these halls countless times, but today felt different, like the walls themselves judged her. Whispers tucked between security clearances and flags. Daniel's warning rang in her head. He'll use your record against you. She hadn't wanted to believe it, but now the summons to the review office confirmed what she dreaded. The past was no longer just memory, it had become a weapon. Inside, the air was stale with recycled coolness, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. A review officer with spectacles perched precariously on his nose greeted her without warmth. On the desk, a thick folder sat like a verdict waiting to be pronounced. Evelyn's heart tightened when she saw the stamped label Fob Lima Incident. Her hand twitched, the memory of sandstorms and sirens flooding back. The officer cleared his throat. Colonel Ward, your file has been reassessed. There appear to be inconsistencies reports suggesting errors in tactical judgment. His tone was clinical, but the suggestion cut with precision. Evelyn felt her chest constrict. That operation had been chaos, lives balanced on seconds and incomplete intelligence. They had all known the cost. But she also knew she had made the best call in the fog of war. She steadied her voice. Those reports were reviewed years ago. They cleared me. The officer avoided her eyes. The chain of command has new questions. The term reckless decisions was noted. Evelyn's throat tightened around the words she wanted to hurl. She could almost hear Michael's voice echoing beneath the officer's sterile delivery, shaping it, twisting her service into liability. A knock interrupted the silence. General Beckett stepped in, his presence commanding even without theatrics. These accusations are recycled garbage, he said, striding toward the desk. Colonel Ward led with courage when others froze. You'll find her so-called errors were nothing more than the impossible choices of combat. The officer shifted uncomfortably, but held his ground. General, the documentation speaks for itself. Evelyn watched Beckett's jaw clench. He had fought too many bureaucratic wars to think this one would be clean. His loyalty was visible, but the obstacles were already built into the system, brick by brick. This isn't about truth, he muttered low. Only for her. It's about who has the pull. Her hands shook as the officer slid the folder closer. Black bars slashed across the pages like scars, entire sections of testimony censored. Yet one line blazed through the redactions, her name, highlighted in yellow, stamped under the phrase responsible for casualties. The words blurred for a second as her vision swam. Rage coiled inside her, twisting against the helplessness that bureaucracy demanded. She pressed her hand flat against the page, as if she could erase it by force. Beckett leaned closer. This reeks of someone digging through old wounds, someone with intent. Evelyn forced herself to breathe, her nails biting into the folder's cardboard. The memory of Michael's whisper at brunch slithered back, venomous and smug. She closed the folder slowly, her voice a rasp as she leaned toward the officer and then Beckett alike. Only one man would dig this up now. All wars are fought twice, once on the ground, once in the shadows. The cafe near Capitol Hill hummed with the low murmur of lobbyists and aides, the hiss of an espresso machine drowning out stray words. Rain streaked the tall glass windows, city lights refracting into blurred ribbons of red and gold. Evelyn sat tucked into a corner booth, her coat still damp, her fingers drumming against the ceramic cup she hadn't touched. The folded note Olivia had slipped her during brunch burned in her mind, cryptic, reckless, and yet the first gesture that didn't feel like betrayal. When Olivia arrived, she kept her head lowered, her heels clicking softly as if afraid to announce her presence. She slid into the booth across from Evelyn without removing her gloves, eyes darting toward the barista, the door, anywhere but her sister's gaze. For a long moment, they simply listened to the storm outside. Olivia's voice was nearly drowned by the rain. Michael isn't just mocking you in public. He's manipulating contracts, defense deals, appropriations. He buries mistakes, buries truths. He's been tightening control for months. Evelyn leaned forward, heart-hammering. And you've known? I didn't know how deep until recently, but he isn't untouchable. Olivia reached into her purse, hesitated, then slid a small black USB drive across the table. Encrypted files, internal memos, communications he thought no one would see. If anyone finds out I gave this to you. She stopped, swallowing hard, then whispered, "He's not invincible." Evelyn closed her hand over the USB, the cold plastic biting into her palm like a promise. For the first time since the gala, something in her chest eased, not relief, not yet, but the faint glimmer of a path forward. She caught her sister's trembling hand before Olivia withdrew. "Why help me now?" Olivia's eyes flicked up, sharp and sad. "Because silence is killing me too." Later that night, Evelyn returned to her apartment. Rain slicked the streets outside, droplets racing down the windowpane in restless streaks. Alexis was waiting, seated on the couch, with a restless energy that suggested she had been pacing until moments before. Her uniform jacket hung carelessly over the armrest, and her jaw was tight with frustration. "You can't keep absorbing his blows," Alexis said the moment Evelyn entered. "The whispers, the reports, they'll define you if you don't fight back. You're not just his sister. You're a soldier, and soldiers don't surrender without firing back." Evelyn dropped her coat, exhaustion mingling with the grim resolve tightening her shoulders. She held up the USB. "I may finally have ammunition." Alexis's eyes widened, then narrowed with cautious hope. "You need to bring it to someone who won't fold under his influence. Inspector General. Someone outside the family's shadow." Evelyn hesitated. The Inspector General's office was formidable, yes, but it was also a gamble. Evidence wasn't enough without timing, without strategy. But as she studied Alexis's fierce determination, she felt her own spine stiffen. She walked to her desk, rain still drumming its uneven rhythm against the glass, and slid the USB into her laptop. The screen flickered to life, the encryption program demanding a password Olivia had scrawled on a napkin. Fingers shaking, Evelyn typed each character, breath held as if expecting the machine to explode. Folders unfolded across the screen. She clicked one at random and there it was. Memos signed with Michael's name, directives twisting her war record into a narrative of incompetence, even suggesting she had lied in her after-action reports. Emails to donors ridiculing her reckless need for attention, paired with photographs from the gala marked for circulation. Each document was a blade aimed directly at her credibility, each word sharpened to pierce her honor. Evelyn scrolled faster, rage rising with every click until her vision blurred. She slammed the laptop shut, the echo reverberating through the apartment like a gavel striking judgment. Her reflection in the darkened screen glared back at her, rain and city lights fractured behind her. "If he wants war," she said aloud, voice steady now, "I'll give him one. A lie doesn't need wings when it's carried by headlines." Evelyn's alarm never had the chance to sound. The buzz of her phone vibrated against the nightstand before dawn, the screen alight with notifications. Dozens of messages blinked at her, missed calls, news alerts, even old acquaintances crawling from silence with concern disguised as curiosity. She sat up, chest tight, and unlocked her phone. There it was, splashed across the Washington Post's front page. Colonel Ward, under review, heroism or hazard. The bold letters seemed to sneer at her, each pixel a fresh wound. Michael's threat from that Sunday brunch "I'll bury you" played in her head, cruel and steady. And now, here was the first shovel of dirt thrown onto her reputation. She pulled on a sweater, the cotton rough against her skin, and stepped toward the window. Across the street, a neighbor paused with his paper, eyes flicking toward her window before quickly turning away. Even the casual gesture felt poisoned. By the time she left her apartment, the swarm had grown. 2 journalists loitered on the sidewalk, their cameras raised with a vulture's patience. "Colonel Ward, do you believe your decisions cost lives? Did the Army overlook misconduct?" Questions fired like bullets, each one louder, sharper. Evelyn kept her chin high, but the words clung like burrs. She pushed through Capitol Hill's crowded streets, coffee shops buzzing with aides, and policy interns scrolling through the same headlines. Snatches of gossip floated past her name, whispered with incredulity, with pity, with quiet derision. Every overheard phrase pressed her deeper into the quicksand Michael had laid. Back inside her apartment, Alexis slammed a newspaper onto the table, her jaw taut. "You can't keep hiding from this," she said. "If he controls the headlines, you need to fight back with your own truth. Go public. Speak before he writes the entire story for you." Evelyn paced, every step heavy with fury and restraint. "If I speak now, I look defensive, desperate. He's counting on me to react so he can tighten the trap. No, I won't give him the satisfaction." Alexis's frustration boiled over. "So you'll just let him smear you until there's nothing left to defend?" Evelyn turned sharply, her voice low but unyielding. "I'll pick my battlefield, and it won't be the front page." Her laptop chimed with a new alert. She hesitated, then opened the email. An attached scan of an anonymous letter to the press glared back at her. The words leapt from the page: reckless, glory-seeking, irresponsible, under fire. The exact phrasing Michael had whispered years ago when he first dismissed her war record as reckless glory. She felt her breath catch. The world didn't need proof it was his hand. She knew it as surely as she knew her own signature. She collapsed into her chair, the letter's language crawling beneath her skin like acid. Rage and fear warred inside her chest, a storm she couldn't yet unleash. The phone on the desk buzzed once more. She picked it up, pressed play on the voicemail, and froze. The voice was male, low, deliberate. "Stop digging, or Daniel pays the price." The room seemed to tilt, the rain outside hammering louder against the glass. Evelyn gripped the phone tighter, her pulse hammering. Michael wasn't just coming for her reputation now. He was reaching for the people she cared about. And that made this war far more dangerous than she'd imagined. The ghosts I carried weren't just mine, they wanted to speak. The words flickered in Evelyn's head as she stared at the text glowing on her phone screen. "You're not alone. Meet me." No name, no number she recognized. Just the promise of company in a war that had made solitude her constant companion. Her pulse quickened not with fear exactly, but with the unease of being pulled towards something she hadn't dared hope for. The address led her to a small cafe tucked off a quiet street in Virginia, the kind of place meant for routine mornings, not clandestine reunions. A bell chimed softly as she pushed the door open. The scent of roasted coffee beans mingled with the rain-soaked air that had followed her in. Alexis trailed behind, her watchful gaze sweeping the room, every muscle coiled like a soldier walking into ambush. At the corner table, beneath the dim glow of a single lamp, sat a woman Evelyn hadn't seen in years. Mira looked up slowly, her eyes shadowed by years of silence. She was older now, lines carved by fatigue across her face, and the faint scar along her temple told stories Evelyn already knew but never heard spoken. The sight made Evelyn's breath hitch. Memories of FOB Lima came flooding back: dust storms, gunfire, the day everything changed. "Evelyn," Mira said softly, as though testing the name on her tongue after too long. Evelyn slid into the booth across from her, her hands tightening around the coffee cup placed there by a nervous barista. "Mira, I thought you were gone. You just disappeared." Mira's lips curled into a bitter shadow of a smile. "I didn't disappear. I was erased." Her eyes flicked to Alexis, measuring her, then back to Evelyn. "After Lima, I filed my report. The truth of what happened. The mistakes made. The lives lost not by you, but by poor planning above our heads. But when I checked later, my report wasn't there. It had been rewritten, sanitized." Evelyn felt her stomach twist. Sanitized by who? Michael. Mira's voice cracked, then steadied, each word weighted. He had access through procurement channels. He buried it, and when I pushed back, I was told my career was over before it had even begun. I was sent away, transferred to nowhere assignments until I resigned, quietly, forgotten. Alexis leaned in, anger sparking in her eyes. "So he's been rewriting history longer than we knew." Mira nodded, her fingers trembling as she reached into her worn leather bag. From it, she drew a folder, its edges frayed, pages inside, smudged but intact. She slid it across the table. Evelyn stared at it, hesitating as though touching it might burn her fingers. "This is the original FOB Lima report," Mira whispered. "My words. Not the doctored version. The truth he didn't want anyone to see." Evelyn finally pulled the folder toward her, opening it with shaking hands. The words leapt at her, familiar in their brutality. The chaos, the casualty counts, the decisions she'd made to save lives, the calculated risks that hadn't all succeeded. But woven through it was clarity, evidence that her leadership had been decisive, not reckless. Proof that she had not failed. Proof Michael had twisted beyond recognition. Her throat tightened. She blinked rapidly, swallowing the storm building inside. Mira leaned forward, lowering her voice so only Evelyn could hear. "He erased me. Don't let him erase you." The weight of the report in Evelyn's hands felt heavier than a weapon. Because that's exactly what it was now, a weapon. Not forged in steel but in words, evidence sharp enough to cut through Michael's lies. She glanced at Alexis, whose fierce nod confirmed what she already knew. This was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming the story Michael had stolen from them both. If truth was a weapon, I had to sharpen it quietly. The words pulsed in Evelyn's mind as she sat at her apartment desk, the pale glow of her laptop illuminating files that could either vindicate her or destroy her if handled carelessly. Olivia's USB lay beside Mira's original report, two fragments of a puzzle that, if fit together, could become Michael's undoing. The cursor blinked like a warning light as she opened each folder, cross-referencing memos, contracts, and whispers of suppressed testimony. Every keystroke sounded louder than it should, as though the walls themselves might report her. The weight of strategy pressed down on her shoulders. This wasn't reaction anymore, it was offense. She copied, collated, encrypted, building digital fortresses around the evidence. The files showed more than personal vendetta. They revealed procurement manipulations, falsified evaluations, intentional erasures. Evelyn felt her anger knot into something harder, sharper. Alexis leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching silently. "You're turning into him," she finally said, voice low. "Only smarter." Evelyn gave a humorless smile. "The difference is, I'm building with truth, not lies." 2 nights later, she drove across D.C., the cityscape blurring past as headlights carved tunnels through the October dark. The Pentagon loomed eventually, its severe geometry a fortress of secrets. She slipped inside under the cover of routine visits, carrying an encrypted drive tucked deep within her bag. Her destination wasn't official channels but a discreet meeting in a nondescript office, where a man waited Inspector General Liaison, his badge barely visible, his expression caught between skepticism and curiosity. "You asked for discretion," he said, without introduction. His voice carried the clipped tone of someone who'd seen too many careers end in whispers. "Show me what you've got." Evelyn placed the drive on the table, steady despite her racing pulse. "Internal memos tying my brother to falsified reports. A field testimony that was buried. Financial irregularities connected to contract awards." Her words came measured, but the air thrummed with their weight. The liaison inserted the drive, scanning files with careful detachment. His brow furrowed once, twice as he scrolled. "These are serious, explosive." He looked up sharply. "Why come through me? You know this can't be buried once it's in our system." "Because I've been buried enough," Evelyn replied. The admission came out harsher than intended, jagged with months of humiliation. As the files uploaded into the IG network somewhere beyond her reach, Evelyn's phone buzzed again. News notifications screamed headlines. Colonel Ward under further scrutiny. Another leak. Michael's fingerprints all over it. He was accelerating his smear campaign, sensing she was no longer a passive target. The timing confirmed she was walking into the storm he had prepared, but this time she wasn't empty-handed. The upload finished. The liaison leaned back, the drive still in his hand. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on hers. "This will go public. Are you ready?" The question hung in the air like a verdict. Evelyn inhaled slowly, feeling the tremor beneath her calm. Ready or not, she had already crossed the threshold. There was no going back. "I fired my first shot, but I wasn't the only one armed." The headlines broke before dawn, and by the time Evelyn opened her blinds, the street outside her building swarmed with reporters. Microphones flashed like bayonets, their voices colliding into one hostile chorus. "Colonel Ward, why undermine military integrity? Are you hiding behind anonymity?" The anonymous IG submission had leaked, faster than she imagined possible, and Michael's machine was already weaponizing it against her. At Walter Reed, she slipped through side corridors to reach Daniel's therapy room, only to find it empty. A nurse at the desk shook her head, voice apologetic but firm. His sessions were canceled. Funding line pulled overnight. Evelyn didn't need to ask who orchestrated it. Michael's reach extended even here, turning Daniel's recovery into collateral damage. Her gut twisted as she imagined Daniel sitting alone in his wheelchair, strength stolen twice, once by war, now by bureaucracy. Later that day, Michael staged his own theater. A press conference broadcast across every major network showed him, immaculate in his tailored suit, standing beneath the family crest. His tone was measured, almost sorrowful, as though the betrayal wounded him personally. "When officers break faith with the chain of command," he declared, "they betray not just their uniform, but the men and women who serve under it. My sister has forgotten loyalty. I will not." The crowd of journalists scribbled like obedient stenographers. The phrase "betray the chain of command" plastered across evening headlines before Evelyn could even change the channel. That night, her apartment became a battlefield of silence. Margaret arrived unannounced, her presence as heavy as the perfume that preceded her. She stood in the center of the living room, her pearls glinting, her eyes as cold as polished glass. "Your stubbornness is destroying us," she said, each syllable precise as a blade. "The Ward name, the foundation your father built. Do you think donors will keep their checks flowing while you drag us into scandal?" Evelyn tried to answer, but Margaret raised her hand, silencing her. "You've always been reckless. Now you're reckless and public," Michael warned you. And with that, her mother turned, leaving the door ajar as if Evelyn didn't deserve even the courtesy of closure. The apartment felt cavernous after she left. Evelyn sank onto the couch, head in her hands, exhaustion coiling like barbed wire in her chest. The weight of humiliation and betrayal pressed down harder than combat ever had. For the first time she wondered if Michael had already won. It was Daniel who steadied her. He had rolled into the room quietly while she spiraled, his chair's wheels barely whispering on the floor. He watched her for a moment, then spoke softly, his voice carrying the strength his body had lost. "Don't stop. They can take my legs, not your honor." The words landed like a lifeline. Evelyn looked up, seeing not pity in his gaze but defiance and echo of the resilience she thought she'd lost. In his quiet affirmation she found the first ember of resolve reigniting. Michael had struck brutally and personally, but the fight was far from over. "Some allies wait until the last second because their scars run deep." The words pulsed through Evelyn's mind as she pushed open the creaking door of the Veterans Bar on the edge of D.C. The air was thick with stale beer and cigarette ghosts, dim lights casting more shadows than clarity. It was the kind of place where soldiers vanished into silence, where wounds, physical and otherwise, were nursed in quiet corners. Evelyn scanned the room until she saw her. Dana Kelso. Time had etched itself into Dana's frame. She leaned heavily on a cane, her limp pronounced but her eyes unwavering. Her hair, once bound tight under Kevlar, now fell loose against her shoulders, streaked with gray despite her youth. When their gazes met, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of battles fought and the cost of survival. "You kept us alive when command forgot us," Dana said after a long silence. Her voice was low, but certain, like testimony already sworn. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Hearing those words, after weeks of being painted reckless and dishonorable, was a balm that almost hurt. They sat in a back booth. The table bore rings from years of spilled drinks, the wood scarred much like the women who leaned over it. Dana reached into her worn satchel and slid a bundle of papers across. Evelyn's hand trembled as she unfolded them. Medical logs, scrawled with field notes from FOB Lima, the chaotic days of blood and dust. Lines recorded, triage decisions, lives stabilized, desperate improvisations. Again and again, Evelyn's name surfaced in Dana's shorthand. Ward insisted on staying under fire to retrieve PVT. Hanley. Ward performed compressions until evac arrived. Ward refused to leave me behind. Evidence not of recklessness, but of sacrifice. Evelyn looked up. These prove everything. Dana's lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "They prove I saw you. That night, the command wanted a scapegoat. They buried my report. They buried me." She tapped her cane against the floor. "But you gave me back a chance at breath. If you fight, I fight." Evelyn's breath caught as Dana leaned closer. "I'll testify. At the IG hearing, let them hear the truth from someone they erased." The weight of the offer pressed heavy, but it wasn't the crushing kind, it was solid, grounding. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt the tide shifting. Not in her favor yet, but no longer entirely against her. She reached across the table, clasping Dana's hand. The grip was firm, soldier to soldier, scar to scar. Their moment fractured with the faint click of a camera shutter. Evelyn's eyes darted toward the corner of the bar. A shadowy figure lingered near the jukebox, phone angled toward them, face obscured by a cap pulled low. The flash of the lens had been small but unmistakable. Her heart pounded as she realized the meeting was no longer secret. Someone was watching, documenting. Another trap was already being set. When the system finally calls your name, you either tremble or roar. The official envelope was heavier than it looked. Its seal, embossed with the insignia of the Inspector General's office, pressed into Evelyn's fingertips as if marking her skin. She stood in the middle of her apartment, staring at the paper, as the weight of every whisper, every headline, every betrayal folded itself neatly into this single summons. The letter was concise, brutal in its simplicity. Appear before the IG Review Board. Pentagon, the 15th of November, 2023. She read it 3 times, lips moving silently, until Alexis's voice broke through the haze. That's it then. No more shadows. Alexis leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her uniform jacket slung over the chair. They've pulled this into the open, which means we stop reacting and start directing. Evelyn sat, smoothing the page flat against the table as if it might rearrange itself into kinder words. They've already written the verdict in their minds, she muttered. That's where you're wrong, Alexis shot back. Michael's counting on your silence, your hesitation, but hearings aren't won on evidence alone, they're won on poise. They'll test your composure, Evelyn. Every raised eyebrow, every pause will be twisted. For 2 nights straight, Alexis walked her through testimony drills. The living room became a courtroom. The couch transformed into a hostile panel of generals. Alexis hammered her with mock questions. Why did you take those risks? Why disobey direct orders? Why should we believe you over official reports? Each time Evelyn stumbled, Alexis pushed harder, unflinching. Better me now than them later, she'd say, until Evelyn's responses sharpened, her gaze steadier. By the morning of the 1st of November, Evelyn had memorized not lines, but rhythm-measured truths carried by the conviction of someone who refused to be erased. Yet the anxiety hummed under her ribs like a live wire. Outside the Pentagon, the air bit with late autumn chill. Reporters swarmed near the barricades, microphones bobbing like weapons. Cameras flared, their questions barbed. Colonel Ward, are you here to save your name or bury it? Do you deny recklessness at FOB Lima? Evelyn forced herself to move past them, heels striking pavement with deliberate force. Then Michael emerged from a sleek black car, tailored suit impeccable, smile rehearsed for every lens. Family loyalty is strong, he told the press, voice dripping with superiority. I trust the board will see through dramatics. After all, medals don't equal wisdom. The crowd lapped it up, scribbling headlines before the words had cooled. Inside, the Pentagon's hearing chamber was colder than the November wind. Rows of uniforms gleamed beneath harsh lights. Behind them, journalists perched like vultures. At the long table, the Inspector General's board shuffled papers, their expressions carved in granite. Evelyn's chair waited at one end. Across from it, Michael had already taken his place, leaning back as though the verdict were foregone. Evelyn inhaled once, steadying herself. The lessons Alexis drilled into her clung to her spine, shoulders square, voice firm, eyes unyielding. She walked to her seat without breaking stride, without glancing at Michael, though she could feel his gaze, smug and sharp, trying to pierce her resolve. The room hushed as the board chair, a stern figure with silver hair and unreadable eyes, lifted the gavel. Its strike cracked like a shot. We will begin public review on November 15th, the chair declared, each word resonant. This session will be held concurrent with the Veterans' Day ceremony. The air in the chamber shifted instantly, reporters scratching furiously, whispers rippling through the ranks. Veterans' Day national stage, public eyes, the one day the military cloaked itself in honor and sacrifice. Now, Evelyn's fight would not be hidden in transcripts or sealed files. It would unfold beneath the spotlights of the country itself. Sometimes humiliation is rehearsed like a play. But not all scripts end as written. The sky above the National Mall was a crisp November blue, the kind of cold clarity that made every flag whip harder in the breeze. Veterans' Day ceremonies had always carried weight, but this one had teeth. The platform was dressed in red, white, and blue bunting. Rows of folding chairs stretched out before the stage, where generals, politicians, and the press crowded together. Soldiers in formation stood like a living wall of steel, boots rooted in perfect symmetry. Evelyn's name had been tucked into the program reluctantly, buried beneath luminaries who had never stepped onto real battlefields. She had been told to smile, accept the token recognition, and fade into the background of spectacle. Yet when her name was called, she felt the collective eyes of thousands, family, peers, strangers, all trained on her as she walked toward the stage. Margaret sat prim and rigid in the front row, pearls gleaming against her collar. Her expression betrayed nothing, though Evelyn caught the faintest flicker of discomfort when the announcer said her name. Olivia, seated a few rows back, tilted her chin almost imperceptibly, a signal of solidarity no one else would notice. Michael was already at the podium, owning the space as though it had been built for him alone. He clasped Evelyn's hand in front of the cameras, squeezing just a shade too hard, the smile on his face engineered for every photographer. Then he pivoted toward the microphone, his voice booming, polished, carrying across the mall. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a proud day to stand beside my sister," he began, his tone thick with counterfeit warmth. Applause rippled, but Evelyn heard the undertone, the expectation, the hush of anticipation for what came next. Michael never left the knife in its sheath. He leaned into the pause, eyes sweeping the rows of uniforms, and then delivered the line with a perfect chuckle. Proof that mistakes wear medals. It cut sharper than the toast at the gala. This time, it wasn't a ballroom, it was the nation's ceremony. Soldiers lined in honor, press cameras flashing like detonations. The crowd gasped, 1,000 inhalations drawn in disbelief. Some laughed nervously, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn stood still, the world narrowing to the echo of her brother's voice. She had expected this strike. Michael never resisted the grand stage. But what she hadn't predicted was what happened next. The silence broke, not with laughter, not with further ridicule, but with movement. One by one, then all at once, the soldiers in formation before the stage rose in perfect unison. A wall of uniforms, a synchronized wave of discipline and defiance. Hands lifted sharply to brows, every face turned toward Evelyn, not Michael. The salute rang louder than applause, louder than the cameras. It was respect, unfiltered and undeniable, cutting through humiliation with a single gesture. Michael's smirk faltered. His carefully scripted humiliation turned inside out before his eyes. Margaret's pearls trembled against her chest as she looked from one child to the other, confusion flickering in her gaze. Olivia allowed herself the smallest smile, lips barely curving, as though she had known this was possible all along. Evelyn inhaled, grounding herself in the sight, the line of salutes, the defiance of silence repurposed into honor. She stepped closer to Michael, close enough that only he could hear, the press unable to catch the words even as cameras feasted on their faces. "Your war is over," she whispered, voice low, steady, lethal. The cameras flashed. The soldiers held their salute. And Michael, for the first time in years, had no words to reclaim the stage. Truth doesn't whisper in hearings, it detonates. The Pentagon review chamber was transformed into a crucible. Rows of polished oak benches were filled with officers, staffers, and reporters, whose cameras glinted like watchful eyes. Television crews had set up along the back, their lenses capturing every twitch, every sidelong glance. Flags hung stiffly on either side of the dais, the stage for a battle that had taken years to ignite. Evelyn sat at the long table, uniform pressed but hands clenched in her lap beneath the surface. Beside her, Alexis leaned in, whispering strategy, reminders to keep her tone calm, her answers sharp. Across the table, Michael lounged with rehearsed confidence, his lawyer at his side, both of them shuffling papers that would soon mean nothing. He wore the look of a man convinced of his own immunity. The chair of the IG panel adjusted his glasses, voice even. "Colonel Evelyn Ward, you may begin." She rose. The papers she carried were not just documents. They were lives, stories, sacrifices, truth, buried in footnotes and redactions. She began with field reports from FOB Lima, her voice steady as she outlined the actions taken under fire, the names saved, the decisions made in chaos. She spoke not for herself, but for those who had been silenced or forgotten. Then Mira stood. Her hands trembled as she swore her oath, but her words did not falter. "I wrote a report, my original report, detailing Colonel Ward's leadership under impossible conditions. Michael Ward ordered me to keep silent. He told me my career would end before it began if I spoke." Her voice cracked, but her eyes hardened. "I obeyed out of fear. Today I speak out of duty." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Michael shifted, his jaw tightening, the smug veneer slipping for the first time. Dana followed, her limp evident as she approached the stand. She placed worn medical logs before the panel, her voice quiet but resolute. "These are my notes from FOB Lima. They record triage under fire, names of the wounded, treatments given. Colonel Ward refused to leave us, refused to abandon men bleeding out. These logs prove her leadership saved lives." She looked directly at Evelyn, then at the panel. "I will testify to that under oath, every day if I must." The air grew heavier with each word, the press scribbling furiously, cameras rolling like witnesses etched in glass. Evelyn stepped forward once more. From her folder, she withdrew the final weapon, a slim, encrypted USB. "These are internal memos obtained from Olivia Ward," she said clearly, her voice slicing the chamber's silence. "They contain evidence of Michael Ward's deliberate campaign to discredit me, fabricated narratives, coordination with select journalists, instructions to bury favorable reports." She handed the drive to the clerk, her heart beat thunderous. "This is not just professional rivalry. This is calculated suppression of truth." Michael's lawyer shot up, his objection sharp, almost desperate. "This material is illegally obtained, irrelevant hearsay." But before he could finish, the chair's gavel struck wood. The echo silenced the room. His words followed, measured but heavy with finality. "Let the record show. Deliberate suppression of truth." The chamber erupted, reporters shouting questions, flashes erupting like gunfire, murmurs swelling into waves of astonishment. Evelyn remained standing, her gaze fixed on Michael, who for the first time seemed cornered, his polished mask fracturing under the floodlight of exposure. The hearing was not yet over, but the detonation had begun. Every empire falls faster than it was built. By late afternoon, the sky over Arlington had darkened to a heavy slate, rain sweeping across the Pentagon Plaza in thin, relentless sheets. Umbrellas bloomed in every direction, cameras wrapped in plastic still clicking, still recording. The press corps had gathered like vultures, their anticipation electric, their microphones thrust toward the podium where the Inspector General prepared to speak. Evelyn stood slightly apart, her uniform damp with the weather, her mind steady in the storm. The IG's voice carried over the rain, amplified through speakers. "Effective immediately, all defense contracts under the supervision of Michael Ward are suspended pending further investigation and potential prosecution." The words fell like artillery rounds. Reporters exploded into questions, shouts layering over one another, but the IG raised his hand and continued. "Several corporate sponsors and affiliated board members have already submitted their resignations. The process of accountability has begun." Michael's jaw worked furiously as the cameras swiveled toward him. The charm that once disarmed rooms had vanished. His expression was brittle, strained. Behind him, Margaret clutched her coat tight, her face pale with fury. She turned not to Michael, but to Evelyn, her voice slicing through the crowd. "You've destroyed this family. Your stubbornness has poisoned everything we built." Evelyn absorbed the words without flinching. They were an old refrain, but now they sounded hollow. Echoes of a power structure that was crumbling in real time. Olivia stepped forward instead, slipping her arm through Evelyn's, her chin lifted against the barrage of flashes. "She saved us," Olivia said quietly, almost drowned out by the press frenzy, but close enough that Evelyn heard every syllable. Michael only destroyed himself. The scene spiraled toward chaos as Michael shoved through the crowd, photographers surging to capture every second of his unraveling. Flashes illuminated his face, twisted with rage, rain glistening across his hair and suit. He barked something about loyalty, about lies, but the words dissolved into the noise. His empire, once fortified by silence and fear, was collapsing in the open air, each resignation, each headline another brick ripped away. Evelyn watched him go, not with triumph, but with the hollow ache of someone who knew victories came at costs. Alexis appeared at her side, eyes sharp, her presence grounding. Reporters clamored for Evelyn's statement, for some declaration of vindication, but she held her tongue. Truth didn't need embellishment. It had already detonated. Then, as the frenzy reached its peak, a hush rippled through the front rows. Daniel had stepped forward, leaning on his cane, his uniform pressed, his body battered but unbroken. He stood tall in the rain, water streaking across his face like tears not shed. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand in salute directed not at the flag above them, nor at the generals retreating into dry cars, but at Evelyn. The crowd went silent, cameras clicking in reverent bursts. Evelyn met his gaze, her throat tightening. The salute was not just recognition, it was absolution, a reversal of all the whispers, the accusations, the humiliations. In that moment, under the storm and the lights, the narrative had shifted entirely. The flashes flared one last time, capturing Evelyn standing steady in the rain as Daniel's salute froze the chaos into history. "Justice isn't loud," it echoes. The November air at Arlington was sharp, filled with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. Rows upon rows of white headstones stretched across the hills, their silence heavier than any courtroom, heavier than any ceremony. Evelyn walked slowly along the path, her boots crunching against scattered leaves. The uniform she wore pressed but softened now by time and wear. She carried no notes, no speeches, only a single medal resting in her palm, its ribbon folded carefully. She paused before a familiar stone. The name etched into it was one she had spoken in her sleep during years of restless nights. She knelt, the cold earth seeping through her knees, and traced the letters with her thumb. Around her, the wind stirred, carrying with it faint echoes of voices soldiers long gone, battles long fought, promises half kept. She closed her eyes. Betrayal had nearly broken her, but it had not erased the truth. She was still standing, and so was their honor. Daniel's cane tapped lightly against the gravel as he approached. For the first time, he was walking more steps without leaning heavily on it, determination carved into every careful movement. Evelyn looked up and saw the effort in his face, the grit in his jaw. He didn't need to say anything. His body carried the message louder than words. He stopped beside her, straightening his back as if to salute the fallen with his very presence. Alexis lingered a short distance away, giving space but holding watch, as she had done through every storm. Her gaze softened, a rare gentleness breaking through her soldier's edge. The three of them stood together, the living remnants of battles external and internal that had cost them dearly yet left them unbowed. Evelyn unclenched her fist, placed the medal carefully against the tombstone, and whispered, "We stood." Her voice cracked, but it did not falter. The medal gleamed briefly under the weak November sun before the clouds closed in again, leaving only the starkness of white stone and autumn shadow. Silence stretched, but it was not empty. It was full, resonant, the kind that seemed to linger long after sound had ceased. Evelyn rose slowly, her shoulders no longer bent under the weight of shame, but lifted by a different kind of burden, the duty to rebuild. As they walked back toward the cemetery gates, Alexis finally broke the quiet. "What now, Colonel?" Evelyn glanced at her, then at Daniel, who managed another step unaided, determination etched in his every movement. Her answer came softly, almost carried off by the wind, but steady enough to take root. "Now, we build." The storm of betrayal had ended where it began, in public, under the gaze of witnesses who finally saw the truth unmasked. The downfall of the powerful brother was swift and brutal, while the sister he sought to erase stood firm among allies, carrying scars but also dignity reclaimed. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime, louder than any insult once cast. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Drop a 1 if you felt the justice, or a 2 if you're still left unsettled.